the blank page, and us. I love the way the Gospels break the news of the resurrection. The details we get which stand the forensic test of time. The authenticity of the emotions of the people involved. The uncontrived nature of the accounts. Ill-designed to persuade first century Jews that they were true. Women being given credit as being the first witnesses when women had no legal standing at all, when their voices were not even admissible in a court of law, let alone deemed credible. The odd, precise details, such as the grave clothes being neatly folded, that don't speak of a body being hastily stolen. I love the joy of Peter leaping out of the boat when he realises that it's Jesus on the shore cooking them breakfast. I love the incredibly gentle and compassionate, but equally incredibly intentional way Jesus takes Peter off on the beach and gives him the opportunity to commit himself to him afresh. Simon, son of John, do you love me? I love the way that Jesus walks with a couple of them on the way to Emmaus in Luke's Gospel. The way he doesn't rush them, but engages with them where they're at. And it's only when he breaks bread with them later that evening that they suddenly see that it's been him all along. I love all of that. In many ways, my own faith really is built on the resurrection. It sounds a funny thing for me to say, but it was the first jigsaw piece, as it were, of the gospel, of the Bible, as it were, that I got my head around, that I truly first believed. And having done that, everything else slowly fitted into place around it. But the thing about Easter Sunday, the thing about Resurrection Day, is that it is great, and there can be few words of song ever written so powerful as "Thine be the glory, risen, conquering Son." It is just fabulously exciting and thrilling, and our vocabulary struggles to convey just how momentous that day was in history. I believe it all. The problem is that life just isn't like that. Maybe I'm just on my own, but life is rarely like Easter morning, is it? I read these accounts and I've trawled through the details and I believe them, but they can so often seem very remote to me. Because life is difficult. And it's really rare that people burst into our houses telling us the absolute impossible has just happened. Too often they bring bad news, don't they? Which does not change into good news. Life is wet with tears because it's painful. Friendships can be broken. Families fall out. Faith can seem futile. Doubt rushes in. You just can't get your head around what God is up to. It all seems so hard to understand. Prayer can seem impossibly hard work. I could go on, couldn't I? But are any of you on that page? Or can any of you relate to being on that page? Because if you are, then I suspect that as exciting as Easter morning is, it very probably seems remote to you. Something you believe in, but you find so hard to relate to. Well, let's peel back the story just a little. Because it's strange, I often find the Bible to be very powerful where it is silent, not just when it has something to say. The week leading up to the crucifixion is recorded in, at some points, literally forensic detail. It is the most documented week of Jesus' entire life. From Jesus' triumphal entrance into Jerusalem on that Sunday, which we remembered last week, to his turning the tables over in the temple on the Monday, to what and where he ate the Last Supper, to where he was arrested on the Thursday, to how he was crucified on the Friday. It reads like a diary. But if it was a diary, we would suddenly turn the page and find a blank page. Not a word. The Bible is completely silent about the Saturday. There is nothing. And this is where we can so often connect. This is where we can relate. When it becomes possibly all too real for us. Because that silence, I believe, is telling. There is nothing because there was nothing. If you were one of Jesus' disciples, everything would have imploded on Friday. Within the space of a week, you followed Jesus into Jerusalem, being hailed as a king. And then, by the end of the week, you've watched him, your rabbi, your closest friend, your everything, just hanging there. First powerless, and then lifeless on a cross. Drooped, slumped, dripping with blood, publicly ridiculed. Surely Saturday saw these men and women in trauma. Their eyes had seen stuff, their ears had heard stuff. None of it made sense to them. In their day's trauma, they don't grasp anything Jesus had promised or explained to them. And it wasn't just incredible grief over Jesus' death. They'd seen one of their own, Judas, betray him. And now he too, according to Matthew, has hung himself. How unbelievably let down must they have felt. Judas had not just betrayed Jesus, he had cruelly betrayed them. If it weren't for him, they'd still have him with them. Wave after wave of grief and anger and total lack of comprehension must have swept over them. It's no wonder that page in the diary is blank. And on top of that must have been guilt. Guilt that they had not in some way been able to kind of protect Jesus. A sense of responsibility that they had faded out of the picture really in fear. Or in Peter's case, lied and denied he even knew Jesus again and again and again. It's no wonder that page in the diary is blank. Where do you even begin? Thomas was probably already beginning to doubt if any of it was true at all. Had they really passed baskets of bread and fish around and fed 5,000 men, and goodness only knows how many women and children? Had they really done that? Had they really been in that house when that crippled man was lowered in front of Jesus and he got up and walked? Had that really happened? Or way back at the beginning at that wedding, had the wine really run out? Had Jesus really transformed the foot-washing water into the best red they'd ever tasted? Really? Really? Suddenly all of that must have at best have seemed like a surreal parallel lifetime. And there was every chance that the powers who falsely accused Jesus and contrived his crucifixion, every chance that if they were so inclined, they could hunt them down too. They possibly felt that they were wanted men, wanted women, who couldn't show their faces. And whereas others in trauma and grief may have sought solace by going to the temple, no one would want to see them there. Jesus' accusers were there. So they spend Saturday with their nothing. Nothing but raw grief. Nothing making sense. Nothing offering hope. Nothing offering sanctuary. Nothing calming their fears. Could it be that the diary page, as it were, is blank because none of them wanted to remember that Saturday? They all wanted to forget it. And the reason we read that first sentence again is I find it so telling that of all the gospel writers, John writes that early on the first day of the week, while it was still dark, Read the other gospel writers and they say it was very early or before sunrise, but John tells us specifically that they set out when it was actually still dark. John, who begins his gospel with those wonderful words of the light shines in the darkness, but the darkness has not understood it. John, who documents in chapter 3 how Jesus told Nicodemus, light has come into the world, but men love darkness instead of light because their deeds were evil. Now he uses precisely the same Greek word to tell us it was still dark when Mary went to the tomb. And I think his use of that word tells us a lot about that Saturday. Dark, godless, frightening, chaotic, gut-wrenching grief, brokenness, pain, incomprehensible. And it wasn't that they all woke up that Saturday morning feeling a fresh spring in their step. For them, the darkness continued. It was still dark. And that makes the Easter story not just believable to me, but accessible too. Because when we feel that life is dark, unbearably painful, events incomprehensible, when we feel burdened by failure, weighed down by guilt, deeply, unbelievably let down by others, swamped by doubt, or emptied by seemingly unending grief, we find a page missing from our Bibles. A day that contained all of that and more. So painful that none of them ever wrote about it. And the fact that it was so painful, so conflicted and confused that they never wrote about it, that can so often connect with where we are at. Real, lived life. And the fact that it was men and women who lived real life, none more real than that Easter Saturday, the fact that they were the ones who were suddenly blown away by the resurrection of their Lord, that helps me. And I pray that it helps you too. When we feel the resurrection is remote from our lived experience, it helps me to realise that no experience I can live through would probably come even close to their Easter Saturday. Yet they experienced Easter Sunday. Jesus' light breaks into their very real darkness. The empty tomb suddenly refills their empty, aching souls. The risen Jesus raises them out of nothingness and floods them with the hope again that everything is to play for. And that, friends, means that Jesus' light can break into our darkness too. Into our grief, our pain, our guilt, our failure, our betrayal, our fears, our vulnerability. Jesus' light can break into ours too. We can experience a resurrection intervention as well, as it were. We too can experience not just resurrection on our deathbed, but resurrection light in our lives. Because it was not just men and women living their best life who traipsed to that tomb that day. It was men and women living through the worst, the darkest days of their lives. Feeling and going through stuff arguably worse than any of the stuff we ever go through. And yet, it wasn't just dawn that brought light into their world. It was a resurrection of the Lord. And I simply pray that this Easter, whatever your lived experience is right now, you may have confidence that light can come into your darkness. Something of the power of Jesus' resurrection can strengthen you in your weakness and where you are struggling in life. Something of Jesus' resurrection radiance can lift shadows and dispel fear about the future, can drive away doubt, And something of resurrection, truth and joy can comfort you in grief and loss, and something of the resurrection light and hope can help you face the future with confidence. That's my prayer for you, for me, for us this Easter Sunday. Amen. Amen. Let's